Idaho lawmakers have only one job to do each and every year, deciding how much money to take out of the economy to run whatever government programs they decide to fund. Media distractions to the contrary, this is the job, and lawmakers aren't very good at it. They're focused instead on evading responsibility, so they upset no one, well, or at least none of their donors. So when public money is spent against Idahoans' interests, lawmakers can claim plausible deniability and say they're not responsible. Case in point, Idahoans are deeply concerned that they're the ones funding the instrument of our country's demise. We're the ones on the hook because we're the ones paying taxes and fees to indoctrinate young minds at Idaho's public colleges and universities. But the chairman of the House and Senate Education Committees didn't bring up the issue when they met recently with the legislature's budget panel called JFAC. The chairman didn't mention it, and JFAC knows about this problem. They know that Marxist and socialist training at Boise State University and the University of Idaho is well documented. It's been talked about in all three committees. You'd think that Representative Lance Clough of Twin Falls and Senator Steve Thane of Emmett would have offered a recommendation to stop public dollars from being used to segregate students by race, gender, or sexual orientation, or stop the use of public dollars to harass a pro-police coffee shop on BSU's campus into closing, or put a halt to Idaho colleges and universities supporting the openly Marxist group Black Lives Matter, or stop taxpayer support to the extreme leftists at National Public Radio, which has radio stations at Boise State and Idaho State University. But they didn't even bring it up. Only Representative Ron Nate, who's a Republican from Rexburg and a legislative budget writer, asked about it. And only he and Representative Priscilla Giddings expressed any real interest in this topic. Giddings has a bill to split the university budget so that each school gets voted on by their individual merits. Clough sounded ambivalent when asked about the idea of defunding social justice training at BSU or the possibility of having separate votes on the budgets at each of Idaho's four-year schools. That's because Clough never bothered to ask his committee to weigh in and offer formal recommendations, leaving the budget panel without direction, which he knew he was going to get with his panel's support. Rather than shackle the social justice programs, Thane said he'd rather the schools offer a class on how socialism has failed. Neither of them provided a clear direction, leaving legislative budget writers to conclude that they shouldn't trouble themselves with such matters. What's happening here, ladies and gentlemen, is an effort to hide the ball. The legislators on JFAC, they'll say they write budgets. They'll say that they have no say in anything except for how money is spent. Policy decisions, why, that's up to a policy committee. It's somebody else's problem. The Education Committee members will claim that all they do is policy. JFAC is the one that decides budget questions. As long as no one talks about it, the media won't write about it. And their constituents will be none the wiser. And they won't know that it was within their power to stop it. When neither budget committee nor education committees are responsible for exercising oversight, the schools continue to operate as they have been, churning out the next generation of anti-Americans right here in Idaho. In the words of 1980s musician Howard Jones, no one ever is to blame. But Idahoans don't have to accept these acts of willful complacency. Idaho can be the first state in the nation to defund leftist indoctrination on our college campuses. If we do that, the lessons learned in Idaho can be used as a roadmap in other states to follow suit. Quite literally, save our country from itself. All the legislature has to do is act decisively. The public is going to have to speak up to get lawmakers to act. And I hope you'll take a moment to call your legislators, sign a petition, at fixidahocolleges.com. It's time to tell your state legislators they have the power to stop indoctrination of Idaho's young adults. And this is the year they need to get it done. It's time yet again for our Status of the Week. And I got to tell you, the competition is hot. I mean, people are racing to be the Status of the Week. It's a next to impossible thing to select from all the outstanding nominations. So many good quality recommendations. With competition so fierce, once again, we find ourselves forced to choose from two people. Two state lawmakers are this week's winners, Greg Cheney and Brooke Green. They're sponsoring House Bill 195, which would create a brand new crime for Idaho anyway. It's called targeted picketing. Greg is a Republican and Brooke is a Democrat, which makes this dumb bill bipartisan. The legislation says any person who intentionally engages in picketing or otherwise demonstrates on the street or sidewalk in front of a person's residence or dwelling place, or the adjacent residence or dwelling place with the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm another person commits targeted picketing. The bill goes on to say that that restriction does not necessarily apply to a residence if it's a person's primary place of business. Okay, now with all that out of the way, this legislation comes about as a result of some admittedly bad behavior wherein people have gone to other folks' house and protested various actions stemming from the government's overreaction to the coronavirus. People are even threatened to come to my house to protest me because they didn't like the way I was protesting COVID restrictions. All I have said is that it's within the people's right to protest, but they shouldn't go to people's houses. I think that's kind of terrible. But should there be a law? Should it be a crime? Should it be a blanket prohibition? Idaho would not be the first place to create a law banning so-called targeted picketing. And in fact, there was a U.S. Supreme Court case back in 1988 where the court upheld a town in Wisconsin's law that targeted and banned targeted picketing. That ordinance was put in place because some protesters went to the home of an abortion doctor and held demonstrations there. So the town passed an ordinance forbidding that activity. Do you see where I'm going here? See, we know what we're talking about when we're talking about masks, but you won't be able to protest against what next? What other abhorrent acts protected by the government would be denied the right of free speech? So that was back in 1988. That case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on 6-3, saying the ordinance was constitutional. But the court struggled to balance a person's right to be secure in their dwelling and the right to free speech. That's the object here. So Justice John Paul Stevens wrote, interestingly, that picketing in order to impose psychological harm is obviously not constitutionally protected speech. But he added that so do picketers have the right to communicate their strong objections to the abortion doctor. However, once they're done with that, he argued, maybe they don't get to remain there and continue to repeat it over and over again in order to harm the family. Now, that's a balanced approach. They get to come, they leave. This is a really good point. So going to someone's house and staging a protest may be an overreaction. I wouldn't do it, and I hope that you wouldn't do it either. But you have a constitutional right in this country to do it. At some point, your right to protest becomes harm, and at that point, it is a crime. So Greg Cheney and Brooke Green have determined that it's all harm, all of it. Even quietly standing in front of someone's house with the intent to annoy is harm. In front of your mayor's house, in front of a pedophile's house, it's all a misdemeanor. That's an overreaction. That's a belief that government has to solve a problem by taking away constitutionally protected rights. That's very typical of status. And that's why Greg Cheney and Brooke Green are our Status of the Week. Have a suggestion for another Status of the Week? Send your suggestions to me, Wayne, at idahofreedom.org, and I'll be happy to consider them. We'll be back next time with another Status of the Week.